in that. Now, in the last couple of decades, an extraordinary thing's been happening, which is that virtually every self-respecting organization in this country has embraced the idea of we need healthy communities. That we need to change the way we work. We need to change our operating system. And so whether it's the Centers for Disease Control, whose whole programs are oriented around in this way, some variation, but in this way, to the United Way, to the YMCA. The YMCA of the USA, 160 years old now, is reinventing itself around the Healthy Communities movement and positioning itself 2,800 sites strong to be a leader in this movement. And many of you are involved with the Ys. This is not an insignificant piece that an institution of that reputation and credibility and role in our country has been so transformed by this. And foundations, you can't find a foundation like the California Endowment, who just announced their latest grant program, Building Healthier Communities. Shocking, 14 communities, all using this basic, same holistic approach. And you can see the logos as this moves on. We see the growth of a movement, and I think what's important about this is what's in the center. Who's in charge? Good question. Who's in charge? No one.
Nobody.
No one. And that's what makes this a movement, is that this is a distributed force of people of all walks of life in the neighborhood, in the block, in our cities, in our communities, who are defining this. Now people are making this programs and initiatives for themselves, but this movement, in fact, has no top. It has no hierarchy. It's a movement that has local expression and relevance, and it is what people make of it. The National Convergence Partnership was formed 5 years ago. I was happy and privileged to be part of its initial founding. Some of our nation's leading health foundations and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and others helping decide they wanted to come together and make grants differently, learn differently, fund communities in a much more collaborative way, and get at this idea of convergence. And if I can go right to the heart of what we mean by convergence is how do we do this? And we do this in our communities all the time. If we're talking about changing the food environment or the built environment, transportation environment, as Commissioner was just saying, we know that those sectors have different North Stars, don't they? Right? Those are the, mobility, or healthy foods, or nutrition, right? So their mission may be different than ours, but the strategies are convergent. So that, for example, as we look at the Healthy Food Financing Initiative that's in the President's budget to put grocery stores in food deserts, what is that? Is that an economic development strategy? Yes. Is that a health equity and disparities reducing strategy? Absolutely. Is it jobs, green jobs in the inner city? Yes. Is it health production? Yes. And so what we have are these convergent strategies, like community-supported agriculture, like placemaking, new urbanism, who are led by people for different reasons, but who essentially are on the same page in their action. I had the chance to go to Taiwan, and I was invited there by their Healthy Cities Coalition, right? And they have 30, 35 cities across the island of Taiwan who are healthy cities doing very much the kind of things that we're talking about all day here, and just as you do. And at the opening dinner, the first night that we got there, were two leading industrialists who separately ran multi-billion-dollar global corporations, sitting at the Healthy Communities dinner. Do you get those kind of executives at your meetings very often? I mean, I was sort of apoplectic, and I'm sure I was a little, but I was sort of like, why are you here? I was glad, but it was sort of like, help me understand this a little bit. So he reaches into his pocket, and he pulls out his health insurance card, right? He said, well, this would be a little hard for you to understand, but we have values in our society that we believe actually everybody, it's a right, that people ought to have care when they need it. And so it's just who we are as a people. And so welcome to Taiwan, and by the way, if anything happens for you, it would be free, because we believe that that's important. He said, but there's a business strategy in it too. And I said, really? So he asked me if I'd read The World is Flat, right? Thomas Friedman. And I said, yeah, I have. And he said, well then, you understand that in the global economy, raw materials, intellectual property, talented individuals, all the factor inputs of a business are flat in a global economy. And any industry, any country can source those from anywhere at essentially the same price. And he said, we compete against you on quality and cost, and you can, your country has some better price, better quality sometimes, and we have better price. But that's a tough differentiator. He said, so about 20 years ago, we decided to put ourselves at risk for the health of the population, and we bought insurance for everybody, which meant that we now hold the risk for the health of our country. So we actually invest in health. So we make sure that schools have healthy nutrition, that we have physical education, that our transit systems work, that there's safe, affordable housing, because you may not know this, but those are the determinants of health. So I'm here because this is the place that we create the return on investment. These are the, he gave me, his business term. These are the factories. You all are the partnerships that are actually creating that. And he said that we believe that the health of our country, because of your sick care costs, create an 8 to 10% greater competitiveness than you. And young man, that's the basis upon which we're going to whip you. Healthy communities is a key part of Taiwan's economic development strategy, where a healthy, prosperous country comes through investment in health, greater productivity, less sick care costs, criminal justice costs of lives not potentiating, right? So when I was showing him this slide from our country, he thought that was really cute. But then he said, well, what do you think of this? So it just is a way of thinking about flipping this a little bit. So now, if we're going to be investment and policy advisors, part of our challenge is, well, what does it mean to create wealth? And I'm just going to suggest from a whole wealth notion that our job right now is not just to create a return to health and well-being off on this west point, right, health and well-being, but how do we invest in strategies that create a return to our natural capital, air, water, soils, toxics issues, open space, biodiversity, right? Gulf of Mexico. How do we make sure that our investments support healthy environment, that they equally create healthy economy, prosperity, jobs, livable wage, etc., social capital, trust, reciprocity, cohesion, and health and well-being. And any investment strategy that is pursued for long, that builds one or two forms at the expense of the other, will eventually bring you down. You neglect the environment, you neglect civic life, you neglect the economy, or you neglect the health of people, and ultimately there's not prosperity. So part of our job is, how is it that we join forces with our colleagues in these other sectors, that every time there's an initiative on the ballot, every time there's something that you're looking at voting on, every time there's a development choice, how is this strategy going to build or deplete these forms of wealth, so that you raise that, so that you're thinking about these longer term. This is sustainability, not how do we get the next grant. I mean, that's important. But this is what sustainable investments are ultimately about. So really, 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 what is our job as investment advisors to enhance and link our initiatives across the environment, across economic development and health, and grow those and become advocates for this larger version of wealth, and then bring these diverse constituencies to bear. Convergent solutions, again, across, that builds constituencies across those that can move policy forward. What do we know about social movements? What do we know about the civil rights movement, environment movement, women's movement, about its distributed nature, about some of these qualities that have allowed it to grow, and what does it mean to be leaders growing a distributed movement? I mean, back to the civil rights, you didn't have to march with Dr. King to take a stand for racism wherever you are. So part of this is how, wherever policy choices are made, investments are made, are we using this distributed force that we've become to help shape what's happening in our communities. So I'd love to open it if we have time, and Peter, feel free to cut it off if we need to. But any comments or questions about what you think is next for this Commonwealth, and thank you for inviting me here.